King Charles for young Princess Charlotte should have been a moment of warmth in a family, often shielded by formality. But something in that message triggered a reaction no one expected. Camilla's voice, usually measured and diplomatic, suddenly cut through the corridors with a force that left royal guards stiffening at attention. What did Charles say? And why did Camilla's outburst stun even those who thought they'd seen everything behind palace walls? If you love uncovering the moments the palace never planned for the public to see, you're in the right place. Hit like, tap subscribe, and share this video with anyone who follows the royal family's most unexpected twists. Every click helps bring these hidden stories to light, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The palace was unusually still that morning, too still. According to the staff, who later recalled the moment everything shifted, Windsor often carried a quiet dignity, but this was different. The air felt watchful, as if the walls themselves sensed something coming. No alarms, no sudden announcements, no flashing lights. Just a subtle tension that made even seasoned royal guards straighten their shoulders. It all began with a letter, an official document stamped by advisors, not a public address edited by palace communications. This was something far more intimate, a handwritten message from King Charles to Princess Charlotte. A small gesture, really delicate ink on thick cream paper, sealed with a personal crest he rarely used anymore. Something he had written the night before, in a moment of reflection that no one around him could fully decode. Charles had spent that previous evening alone in his study, surrounded by photos of the grandchildren he always wished he had more time with. Charlotte's picture, bright-eyed, always curious, rested closest to him. She had recently asked a question during a family gathering, one that caught him off guard. "Grandpapa, what do you think I'll be like when I'm older?" To everyone else, it was just a sweet question from a child. But to Charles, it stirred something deeper. A reminder of legacy, of time moving faster than he ever expected, of the silent pressures placed on the young royals long before they understood what those pressures meant. So he wrote her a message, something warm, gentle, a mix of heartfelt wishes and quiet truths only a grandfather could express. He had no idea that the words he chose would ripple far beyond the one person they were meant for. In the morning, as the letter was prepared to be passed along discreetly to William and Kate, one of the senior staff members paused. They noticed the tone not inappropriate, not dramatic, simply emotional. More emotional than Charles typically allowed himself to be, and that alone felt unusual enough to raise eyebrows. Still, it was a private family message, so it continued its path. The moment everything tipped sideways came a few minutes later, when Queen Camilla received a copy of the message. No one fully understands how she came across it. Some say Charles mentioned it casually. Others whisper that a staff member showed her unintentionally while handling the documents for the day. But the moment her eyes fell on the words he'd written, particularly the part where he spoke about the future role he believed Charlotte might play her, expression changed instantly. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't anger toward Charlotte. It was something more complicated, layered in years of navigating the delicate balance of public opinion, legacy, and her place within the monarchy. A royal guard nearest to the corridor later, said he, heard the shift before he saw it, the sudden sharpness in Camilla's voice, cutting through the normally quiet morning like glass striking stone. "What is this supposed to mean, Charles?" Her tone was not loud, but it carried. It's the kind of tone that made even the most composed staff members freeze mid-step. It's the kind that had royal guards instinctively turn their training kicking in, not because there was danger, but because a change in the palace's emotional atmosphere could be just as urgent. Inside the room, Charles looked up from his desk, surprised. He hadn't expected any reaction at all, let alone this one. "It's just a message for Charlotte," he replied, confused. Nothing more. But Camilla held the paper with a grip that betrayed her calm exterior. She wasn't upset at the affection or the sentiment. She was reacting to the weight of it, specifically the line where Charles had written that he hoped Charlotte would one day carry forward the strength, grace, and duty our family depends on. To him it was a grandfather expressing belief in his granddaughter's potential. To Camilla, it read like a quiet declaration of the future, a future already tangled in public scrutiny, succession debates, and the never-ending comparisons between branches of the family. More importantly, it revealed something she feared, that Charles was thinking deeply about the generations ahead, perhaps more deeply than he had shared with her. "Charles," she said, softer, but still tense. "You should have spoken to me before writing something like this." He frowned. "It's a note for a child, Camilla, not a royal decree." "That's exactly why it matters," she shot back. The staff outside pretended to focus on their tasks, though every ear tilted slightly toward the conversation. Royal arguments weren't rare, but this was different. There was emotion in Camilla's voice that none of them could quite place. Not irritation, not resentment. Something closer to worry.
Inside the room, Charles leaned back, trying to understand the sudden storm. Camilla exhaled and looked at the letter again. They're already under so much pressure, the Wales children. If you write something that hints at expectations, even accidentally, someone might misinterpret it. "It's private," Charles reminded quietly. "Nothing stays private forever," she whispered back. For a moment, neither spoke. The palace, normally filled with chatter and routine, seemed to hold its breath point when the guards later described the atmosphere as charged but fragile, like something delicate had cracked but not broken. Charles stood and gently took the letter from her. "I only wanted her to know I believe in her. That's all." Camilla's shoulders softened, but the tension didn't fully leave her. "I know," she replied, "but the world reads into everything you do, even this." It was a reasonable point, but the outburst, the rawness behind it, came from something deeper than protocol. It came from fear. Fear of misinterpretation. Fear of headlines twisting a grandfather's affection into some political statement. Fear of another wave of pressure landing on a child who deserved none of it. When Camilla finally stepped out of the room, two staff members lowered their eyes politely, but they felt the emotional weight she carried with her. Even her pace was different. Faster, sharper, her hands clasped tightly together. Charles stood alone for a long moment, staring at the message that had somehow shaken the harmony of the morning. He hadn't meant to cause conflict. He had simply answered a child's question with a grandfather's heart. But inside the palace, even gentle intentions can ignite storms, and this one had only just begun. The moment Camilla stepped out of Charles's study, the tone of the palace shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Yet everyone who crossed her path sensed a tension they couldn't quite name. Camilla was usually composed, a master at navigating public expectations and private storms. But this was different. Her footsteps echoed down the marble corridor, sharper than usual. A pair of royal guards standing at attention exchanged the quickest glance. Barely a flicker, but enough to confirm they felt it too. Guards weren't trained to react to emotional waves, yet after years inside the palace, they learned the patterns. Calm mornings had rhythms. This one was out of tune. Camilla didn't yell. She didn't slam doors. Instead, her silence carried an intensity that made the air feel heavier. She walked straight toward her private sitting room and closed the door behind her. Firm, not forceful, but decisive enough that two staff members paused mid-step. Moments later, a senior aide quietly pulled the others aside and whispered, "Give her space." Inside the room, Camilla sank into her chair and stared at the folded message resting on her lap. She wasn't angry at Charles. She wasn't upset with Charlotte. If anything, she adored the children and had always tried to step into the complicated role of being both supportive and respectful of their parents' boundaries. What unsettled her wasn't the affection in Charles's words. There was a meaning behind one specific line, a line that seemed to hint at the future. A future she feared the public would dissect the moment it surfaced, and she knew how ruthless that world could be. Camilla picked up the letter again, tracing the ink with her finger. "Strength, grace, and duty our family depends on." She closed her eyes. Everything inside the monarchy was layered with meaning, sometimes unintentionally. A simple message could become a headline. A line meant for a child could be interpreted as succession planning, favoritism, or an indirect comment on other family members. The public didn't need much to start a storm. And with the Wales children already under relentless scrutiny, Camilla couldn't bear the thought of another wave of pressure falling on Charlotte. An innocent child who had no say in the roles the world tried to assign her. But there was something else she feared. Something she didn't say out loud, not even to Charles. She feared the future without him. Ever since his health had become the subject of quiet internal conversations, she'd felt the urgency of time differently. Every decision he made, Every message he left, every word he put into writing, she read them through a different lens. A lens shaped by love, by fear, by the weight of roles she never imagined stepping into decades ago. So when she saw the letter, the emotions collided. Worry for Charlotte, worry for Charles, worry for the future that was approaching faster than any of them admitted. A knock sounded on the door. Camilla inhaled slowly before saying, "Come in." Her private secretary stepped forward cautiously, offering a respectful bow. "Your Majesty, is there anything you require?" Camilla looked up, schooling her features back into the calm mask she wore in public. "Just some tea, please, and no visitors for the next hour." The secretary nodded and retreated. Alone again, Camilla leaned back and let the memory of the conversation replay in her mind. The surprise on Charles's face, the confusion, the softness in his voice when he said the message was simply for Charlotte. Perhaps she had overreacted. Perhaps she had let the worry twist her initial instinct. But that didn't change how she felt. A gentle knock returned a few minutes later, and a footman entered with a tray of tea. He placed it quietly on the table, but as he turned to leave, his eyes flicked, just for a second, toward the letter in Camilla's hand. He had recognized the seal. Word might travel, not intentionally, not maliciously, but things traveled in the palace even when no one spoke them aloud. Expressions, atmospheres, the way people walked in and out of rooms, in a house full of routine. Anything unusual drew attention. As the door shut, Camilla's mind drifted to a memory, one she rarely visited. Years ago, when she first stepped fully into public royal life, she'd learned a harsh truth. The world didn't always interpret actions the way they were intended. Even quiet gestures became controversies. Even kind intentions were twisted when viewed through the lens of expectations. And now, seeing Charles write something heartfelt but fragile, she feared history might repeat itself. Only this time directed at a child. That was what shook her the most. A child shouldn't carry weight meant for adults. A message meant for love shouldn't become a narrative for criticism. She took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth steady her breathing. Then another memory surfaced. The looks Charlotte had given Charles during the last family gathering. Admiration, innocence, and a spark of curiosity only children possessed. Charles had melted instantly, softening in a way he rarely allowed in public. They shared a bond built on stories, laughter, and gentle encouragement. Camilla cared for that bond. She cherished that Charles had found such joy in his grandchildren. But the world outside the palace often turned genuine affection into speculation, and she feared that once again the institution might overshadow the human being behind it. She set the cup down and stared at the far wall. "I shouldn't have raised my voice," she whispered to herself. But she knew why she did. Because she felt the pressure too. Because she carried the weight of protecting the family's stability in ways the public never saw. Because loving someone in the crown's shadow meant guarding even their smallest actions. A soft footstep outside the door caught her attention. One of the guards, likely assigned to stand outside her sitting room, shifted his stance. Even through the closed door, she sensed concern. Not invasive, not curious, just aware. Royal guards saw everything without saying a word. They were silent witnesses to the human parts of royal life. Tears, arguments, reconciliations, fears. Their presence was steadying, almost grounding. Camilla took a deep breath, grounding herself, then slowly folded the letter. She wasn't ready to face Charles yet, not with the lingering tension. But she knew the moment was coming. They would need to talk, not about protocol, not about public interpretation, but about the unspoken fears between them, fears they both carried quietly. She stood, smoothing her dress, and walked toward the window. Outside, the palace gardens looked peaceful, children's laughter faintly drifting from a distant corner where Charlotte and her brothers played under supervision. The sight softened something inside her. Maybe the moment had passed. Maybe she had overreacted. Or maybe her instincts were simply sharper because she knew how quickly innocent things became complicated inside these walls. Either way, one truth remained. This wasn't really about the letter. It was about everything beneath it. And the palace was about to feel the ripple far beyond this room. Prince William didn't hear about the incident from an aide, a guard, or a report. He heard in the most ordinary, unmistakably parent way possible, through the subtle change in his daughter's energy. Charlotte was usually bright, lively, and endlessly curious. But that afternoon, as she sat on the sofa beside her mother with a book, she wasn't actually reading. William sensed something was off. He recognized that quietness. It wasn't sadness, but a kind of thinking too hard for a child her age. He exchanged a glance with Kate. She had already noticed. Of course, she always did. "Lottie," Kate said gently, brushing a hand through her daughter's hair. "Did something happen today?" Charlotte hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. "Grandpa sent me a message," she murmured. "It was very nice. But I don't know why everybody keeps whispering about it." William felt his breath catch, not with panic, but with that sharp parental alertness that instantly turns small moments into serious ones. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Charlotte shrugged. "Just, some people look worried." "I don't know why a message would make people worried." Kate gave William the smallest, calmest, but most telling look. "We need to get ahead of this." Charlotte, still too young to understand the full complexity of royal life, simply knew what she saw, the reactions of adults. And children were excellent observers, even if they didn't understand the full picture. Kate gathered her daughter into her side. The message was lovely. "I'm sure the whispers aren't about you, darling." Sometimes grown-ups get confused about things that really aren't confusing at all. Charlotte nodded, comforted, then wandered off to join George and Louis in the garden. The moment she left the room, William exhaled slowly. "So it's already reached the children," he muttered. Kate folded her hands neatly, her expression thoughtful rather than distressed. "We should speak to your father. And Camilla, gently, before this becomes something it never needed to be." William nodded. He wasn't annoyed, he wasn't upset, but he was protective, especially when it came to his children. The Wales household operated with a firm boundary. The kids were not to be dragged into palace currents. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the private hallway connecting their quarters to the king's wing. Kate followed. "Let's go together," she said, because these conversations always went better when approached with united calm rather than royal formality. As they walked, a pair of royal guards opened the doors with respectful bows. And here, too, William noticed something. Guards rarely looked unsettled, yet today they carried the same stiffness he'd seen during tense family moments in the past. Something had indeed happened. When they reached Camilla's sitting room, they were met by her private secretary, who paused before speaking. "The Queen Consort is inside, Your Royal Highness. She's resting, but she did say she's willing to speak with you." William nodded, and after a gentle knock, they entered. Camilla looked up from her chair. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. If anything, she looked tired, emotionally, not physically. "William, Catherine," she said softly, "I suppose you're here about the letter." Kate approached first, always a steady, grounding force. "We're not upset," she said immediately. "Truly, we just want to understand what happened." Camilla placed a folded message on the table. "It was beautiful," she admitted, "and that is why I reacted too quickly. When I saw the line about the future, it frightened me. Not because of what he said, but because of how people outside these walls might twist it." William softened at this. He knew more than anyone how the public could weaponize even the gentlest gestures. "Camilla," he said quietly, "my daughter adores her grandfather, and he adores her. That's all that letter was. A grandfather being sentimental." "I know," Camilla whispered. "Truly I do. But when you've spent years watching the press turn love into scandal, you start hearing echoes everywhere." Kate exchanged a compassionate glance with William. She understood Camilla more than people realized. Their experiences with scrutiny were different, but the emotional toll had similarities. "We can handle the outside world," Kate said with a soft smile. What matters is that Charlotte didn't sense tension, but she did notice something. Camilla's face fell slightly. "Oh, dear, it's all right," Kate reassured her. She wasn't upset, just confused. "We'd rather manage this now than let it grow." For a long moment, the room fell into a reflective silence. William stepped closer and said gently, "Perhaps it's best if I speak privately with my father, just to clear the air." Camilla nodded. He would appreciate that. He's been worrying since this morning. Kate reached out, laying a comforting hand on Camilla's arm. "You care about the children. Anyone can see that. We're not here to blame you." Camilla's eyes softened with gratitude. Then came another unexpected voice from the doorway. "I believe," Charles said as he entered, "we all need a moment to breathe." Everyone turned. Charles stepped into the room slowly, carrying himself with that familiar dignity, but also a rare vulnerability in his expression. "William," he said, his tone warm, "I didn't intend for the letter to cause any disruption. It was simply a message to a granddaughter I love very much." William nodded. "I know, Pa." And Charles added, glancing at Camilla, "I now understand how it may have sounded in certain contexts." Camilla lowered her eyes. "I may have overreacted." Charles approached her slowly and touched her shoulder. "You reacted because you care, and I love you for that." For a moment, the room softened, tensions dissolving not through formality, but through genuine family connection. William stepped forward, his tone calm but purposeful. "Let's keep this simple," he said. "Charlotte keeps her letter. We don't overthink the wording. And whatever brought all of us here, let it stay in this room." Kate nodded. No press, no staff whispers, no snowball effect. Charles offered a grateful smile. "Agreed." But then William added something unexpected, something that shifted the atmosphere again, not with tension, but with a gentle, meaningful weight. "Pa," he said quietly, "Charlotte asked me today what she'll be like when she's older." She meant it innocently. "But your message, it meant something to her too. Something comforting." Charles blinked, visibly moved. "She feels seen," William continued. "That's what matters." It was a perfect resolution, private, human, grounded. But as they all stood together, the guards outside the door shifted in their silent duties. They didn't know the words exchanged, but they knew one thing clearly. This chapter of tension had ended, yet the ripple it caused inside the palace was still traveling outward. Be why the next morning, the palace felt calmer, but not completely. The storm had passed, yet the sky still held the weight of what had happened. Royal households were often described as machines of tradition, but inside the walls, they were more like ecosystems. A single emotional shift, an argument, a misunderstanding, a moment of vulnerability, could ripple through the halls in ways few outsiders ever realized. And though no one spoke openly about yesterday's incident, the air still carried a quiet alertness. William and Kate had kept their word. The moment remained private. No aide, no extended staff, no outside discussions. But it was impossible to fully erase the subtle awareness among those closest to the family. In palaces, people noticed mood before they noticed news. Still, something else had changed too, something quietly positive. That morning, as Charles walked into private family lounge, Charlotte rushed up to him with a smile bright enough to melt any lingering fog in his mind. "Grandpapa," she said, holding the letter delicately in one hand. "I read it again this morning." Charles knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "Did you, my dear?" Hum. She nodded enthusiastically. "And I kept thinking about the part where you said you believe in me." His heart softened and his eyes warmed. "Well, it's true." Charlotte hesitated, then added quietly, "Mummy and Daddy said grown-ups sometimes get confused about things. But I wasn't confused. I like what you wrote." For Charles, those words felt like sunlight. Camilla entered the room just in time to see the moment, and though her chest tightened with a ripple of regret, she also felt relief that whatever had weighed heavily on her the day before hadn't touched the child at the center of it all. She stepped forward and offered Charlotte a warm smile. "Your grandpapa writes very thoughtful letters," she said gently. Charlotte nodded. "I want to write him one back." The innocence of that statement softened every corner of the room. Kate, standing nearby, watched the interaction with a mix of pride and tenderness. She had been protective during the situation, but never defensive. The goal was never about blame. It was about stability, about ensuring the children remained shielded from unnecessary tension. William joined her quietly, his voice low but warm. "Pa needed that moment," he murmured. Kate nodded. So did Charlotte. And perhaps, in a way, so did Camilla. Later that afternoon, Charles and Camilla found themselves alone again, this time not in conflict, but in reflection. They had both lived through enough decades to know that moments like yesterday were part of the natural rhythm of family life, no matter how grand the surroundings. Camilla poured tea for both of them, her movements slower, more mindful. Charles accepted the cup and gave her a small, appreciative smile. "I've been thinking," she said softly, settling into the chair opposite him, "about why I reacted the way I did." Charles didn't rush her. He never did. She continued, "I wasn't upset with the letter. Truly, I was overwhelmed, I suppose, with everything happening around us, with the pace of things." She paused. "Sometimes I worry about the future, about carrying this role, about losing you sooner than I can bear." The last sentence trembled, not dramatically, but with the fragile honesty that only surfaced when all guards were down. Charles reached across the table and gently took her hand. "My darling," he said, his voice steady but tender, "I'm not going anywhere." Camilla smiled through her quiet vulnerability. "I know, but sometimes my mind gets ahead of reality." "It happens," Charles replied, "to both of us." A comfortable silence followed, warm, not heavy. Outside the window, a pair of royal guards walked across the stone courtyard, their uniforms crisp, their posture rigid. They moved like shadows of tradition, silently reminding everyone of the world they all served. Yet inside the room, Charles and Camilla felt more human than royal. "I don't want the children to grow up under pressure," Camilla said softly. "And I know that wasn't your intention. I simply reacted." Charles gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "We're all adjusting. No one expects perfection." Her eyes softened. "Not even a king?" He smiled. "Especially not a king." Their quiet laughter blended with the soft rustling of leaves outside. Meanwhile, William and Kate met with their senior aides in the afternoon. But unlike typical briefings, this one included a rare directive. No discussion, no mention, no rumors, no hints. "Yesterday stays with us." The aides nodded, respectfully, trustingly. Kate added, "This is a family matter, not a palace matter." William finished with, "We protect the children first. Everything else comes after." And that was that. Across the palace, the subtle tension continued to dissolve. By evening, something almost ordinary happened, something that grounded the entire family. Charles requested that everyone gather for a simple, quiet dinner. No official seating plan, no formal protocol, just family. George and Louis argued playfully about who got the last role. Charlotte proudly read a line from her school assignment. William teased Kate for stealing half of his dessert. Charles told a story from his childhood that made the children giggle uncontrollably. And Camilla, relaxed, smiling, watched it all with a softened heart. It wasn't grand. It wasn't orchestrated. It was human, and in its simplicity, the palace felt warmer than it had in days. Later that night, after the children went to bed, Kate whispered to William as they walked back to their quarters, "Today ended better than it began." William nodded. "Tomorrow will too." He knew it, because despite titles, crowns, and responsibilities, the truth remained. They were family first. And families stumble, misunderstand, argue, and then find their way back. The next morning, as Cambridge dawn settled over the palace, the royal guards resumed their posts with renewed calm. Their eyes scanned the grounds, but the tension from the previous day had vanished completely. What remained was quiet, peaceful routine, the kind that signaled the household was steady once more. And deep inside the palace, the now famous message, once a spark of confusion, sat tucked safely in Charlotte's drawer, not as a symbol of pressure, not as a point of conflict, but as a reminder of something far more powerful: a grandfather's love, a family's resilience, and the quiet truth that even inside the most scrutinized household in the world, hearts still lead the way.